Okay, imagine this scenario. You've got this massive global company, a real heavyweight, right?
Mm.
And they announce their latest financial results.
Okay.
And well, let's just say they're soft. Revenue's down, profits are way lower in some key areas.
Right. Standard logic says the stock should take a hit, maybe a big one.
Exactly. But what if it did the complete opposite? What if the stock actually surged right after that news? It's this really counterintuitive thing we're diving into today.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It really challenges, the conventional wisdom about markets and company performance. It suggests maybe there's more to the story than just the bottom line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the company at the center of this is the luxury giant LVMH. We're looking at this recent event that, like you said, seems to just rewrite the business playbook.
Hmm.
Our whole deep dive today is really framed by this compelling article. It's called "The Cultural Nation Strikes Back. LVMH Turns Soft Numbers into a Sovereignty Play." And it's written by Marc Abergel, who's a luxury executive based over in Paris. So our mission really is to unpack his argument. His big idea is that LVMH isn't just a regular company, a conglomerate. It's something deeper, a cultural nation, he calls it.
A cultural nation,
Yeah.
that's quite a term. So we're exploring how that view changes how we think about value, about resilience, maybe even power on a global scale.
Precisely. So let's start with the numbers, the ones that looked, well, soft. What did Abergel report from LVMH's H1 2025 results?
Right, so according to Abergel's piece, the group's overall revenue actually slipped by 4%. And digging a bit deeper, profits were down pretty significantly, like 15 to 22% across some really key segments.
Like fashion and leather goods, that's usually their powerhouse.
Exactly. That division saw its numbers shrink. It seems there was a bit of a slowdown in global demand impacting them. So yeah, on paper, it genuinely looked like a tough first half.
Okay, so not great headlines financially, but
Sure.
then the market reaction, this is where it gets weird, right?
This is the core of the paradox. Abergel points out this immediate, almost defiant response from the market. LVMH's stock jumped pretty substantially, 5 to 7%, right after these earnings came out.
Wow.
He even gives the specifics for Friday, July 25th, 2025. The stock opened around 464, shot up to 494, and then closed the day strong at 489.25. He actually calls it a defiant ascent.
Defiant ascent, I like that. It implies the market just shrugged off the numbers.
Or maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe it was reacting to something else entirely, something not in the quarterly report.
Which brings us to Marc Abergel's explanation. How does he make sense of this?
Well, his central thesis is that this wasn't really about the financials, not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
He argues it was more like a revelation of cultural power.
Okay.
The market, he says, was finally pricing in LVMH's true moat, and he defines that moat as its civilizational endurance and something he calls cultural statecraft.
Cultural statecraft.
Mm.
Wow.
His quote is pretty striking. It was a flex of cultural statecraft, proving that in the era of cultural nations, sovereignty is the new margin.
Sovereignty is the new margin. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a big statement. What does he really mean by sovereignty in a corporate context? Is it just being big and influential?
It's more than just size, I think. It's about ultimate autonomy, like a nation-state making its own rules, defining its own destiny.
Right.
Abergel seems to be applying that idea to LVMH. It's their power to shape desire, to define value,
Yeah.
almost independent of short-term market swings or even these quarterly results. It's just this deep control over their own story, their own narrative.
So they're not just reacting, they're creating the conditions, a cultural nation. It really reframes everything. Abergel even says LVMH was never a conglomerate like we normally think of one.
Right. He describes it instead as a sovereign entity that exports desire, mythology, memory, and soft power at global scale.
Desire, mythology, memory, that's not typical business language. It sounds more like building an empire or
Yeah,
something.
it does push us to think differently, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
what's really interesting is that Bernard Arnault, LVMH's CEO, seems to echo this long-term, almost philosophical view himself.
Oh, yeah.
In that Le Figaro interview from July 25th, he's quoted saying, "Je suis très optimiste à moyen terme." He's optimistic for the medium term. And then he says, "Nous sommes toujours sortis renforcés de ces périodes."
Meaning,
We always emerge stronger from these periods because we take advantage of them to reinforce our creative capacities, our production tools. He's explicitly saying downturns are opportunities to strengthen the core, not just cut costs.
that's definitely playing the long game. It's not about the next quarter's results.
Exactly. And he goes on, "Quand je parle à mes équipes, when I talk to my teams, it n'est pas le chiffre d'affaires que j'ai en tête, mais la qualité, l'image et la désirabilité de nos marques."
So it's not turnover he's focused on, but quality, image, desirability. That's pretty unusual for a CEO to say so openly, isn't it?
It really is. He finishes, Nous poursuivons toujours le même objectif de long terme. Proposer à nos clients des produits de plus en plus désirables. Always pursuing the same long-term goal, offer customers increasingly desirable products.
It lines up perfectly with Abergel's idea of focusing on meaning over simple metrics. Like they're building monuments, like you said, not just widgets.
So if the CEO himself is downplaying turnover, what does that do to market valuation? Abergel argues that stock surge wasn't a fluke. He says it signals the dawn of pricing cultural nation as a premium.
A premium, even when the economy's slowing down.
Apparently so. The market seems to be recognizing that LVMH's real value isn't just in its earnings per share, but in its power to command culture, to shape desire. It's valuing a kind of deep-seated resilience that maybe transcends normal economic cycles.
Okay, so if LVMH represents this cultural nation idea, Abergel suggests we're moving into a new era altogether. He talks about leaving behind the age of, what was it? Algorithm chasing, influencer fatigue.
Infinite product drops, and marketing that screamed louder than it resonated.
Yeah, basically that noisy, short-term digital frenzy we've seen so much of.
He thinks that's ending. He thinks we're entering what he calls the era of cultural nations. In this new paradigm, brands aren't just judged on growth or margins anymore.
Just what are they judged on?
On their ability to shape collective memory, to architect meaning, to embed themselves into the cultural subconscious. It's quite profound, really.
Wow. Architecting meaning. So soft power, the kind we usually talk about with countries.
Exactly. That becomes, in Abergel's view, luxury's most precious KPI, key performance indicator. It's shifting from just selling stuff to selling, I guess, a piece of a larger story, a shared narrative.
But how on earth do you measure that, shaping collective memory? Is it just vibes? Or are there actual ways to track this soft power KPI?
That's the big question, isn't it? Abergel implies it's not about clicks or follower counts. It's more about long-term cultural resonance. Does the brand become part of how people aspire, how they remember things, part of the heritage?
Mm-hmm.
It's subtle, maybe, but pervasive. And this perspective, Abergel argues, helps explain why LVMH seems so solid, while some competitors, he says, are sputtering.
Right, he mentions Gucci, Coach, Burberry. Is he being a bit harsh there? They have cultural impact too, surely. What's the key difference he sees?
His argument is about where they place their sovereignty, to use his term again. He suggests those other brands kind of handed over their cultural sovereignty to virality, chasing likes on Instagram and TikTok.
Chasing the algorithm.
Right. Chasing fleeting trends instead of building, as he puts it, anything to last. LVMH, in contrast, held on to that control. It's like the difference between creating a viral moment and building an enduring myth.
That makes sense. Build the foundation. Don't just chase the latest thing.
And he uses these really interesting historical analogies to back this up. Like the British monarchy, enduring through ceremony and myth, not just commerce. Or the Vatican, shaping belief through ritual and art.
Not through selling products.
Exactly. He says LVMH operates like a sovereign state, owning narratives and creating desire. It adapts its core myth, but doesn't just bend to every passing trend.
So going back to those softer H1 numbers, LVMH wasn't actually retreating. Abergel sees things like flat perfume sales or slower watch growth differently.
Yeah, he frames them not as weaknesses, but as costs of fortification. Like they were consciously trading some short-term profit to strengthen their long-term sovereignty.
Investing in the future, basically.
Exactly. Instead of pulling back during a slowdown, he says they were actually expanding their cultural borders, almost like a nation investing in, I don't know, infrastructure or diplomacy during tough times.
Okay, so what were some of these specific sovereignty moves Abergel points to?
Well, one example he gives is the Louis Vuitton cruise ship boutique they opened in Shanghai. He doesn't see that just as a cool shop.
No.
He calls it a territorial expansion of French mythology, like planting a flag for French culture right in the heart of China's consumer imagination. It's influence, not just retail.
Wow, okay. That's a different way to look at a store opening. What else?
The huge renovation of the Tiffany flagship store in New York.
Yeah.
Abergel frames that as a restoration of national heritage.
Reclaiming cultural ground, kind of. Because Tiffany is so American.
Precisely. And then there's Frederic Arnault taking over Loro Piana. Abergel sees this as a deeper strategic play. It's about turning quiet luxury, which is a big trend now, into something more permanent, cultural permanence.
So not just riding a trend, but embedding that style within the LVMH stable long term.
Exactly. And Bernard Arnault himself touched on this in that Figaro piece. He said, roughly translated, our client's taste is less oriented toward show-off, which hurts some competitors, but it's more favorable to quiet luxury. And in that category, the brand growing fastest is one of ours, Loro Piana.
So Arnault's confirming they're deliberately cultivating that enduring, quieter elegance, while others are maybe still chasing the louder trends. It fits the cultural nation idea perfectly.
It really does. While others make noise, LVMH is defining taste.
Okay, Abergel also highlights 4 specific pillars, let's call them, from this recent period that really drove home LVMH's cultural strength, despite the softer financials. First up, Dior's Jonathan Anderson debut back in June 2025.
Right? Not just a fashion show. Abergel calls it a civilization statement.
Mm.
Apparently, it got over 1 billion views across different platforms.
1 billion views is a lot, but how was it cultural statecraft? What did it do beyond showing clothes?
It was about reasserting a dominant narrative. You had Delphine Arnault, Bernard's daughter, overseeing Dior, bringing in Jonathan Anderson.
Yeah.
It was effectively casting a new, authoritative vision for French high fashion.
Yeah.
It signaled that Dior, and therefore LVMH, remains at the absolute forefront, setting the agenda for global aesthetics. It wasn't just selling dresses. It was commanding attention, shaping the whole conversation around fashion.
Got it. Pillar number 2, Moët Hennessy Private. This is now led by another son, Alexandre Arnault. Wines and spirits profits were down quite a bit, like 33%, but Abergel sees this differently.
Yeah, he doesn't see it as a failure, but as a strategic pivot. He calls Alexandre's focus on this ultra-exclusive tier a statecraft move.
So if the overall profit was down?
Because it's about fortifying LVMH's grip on the very peak of aspiration. By concentrating on private clients, rare stuff, the absolute top end, Alexandre isn't trying to sell more bottles overall.
He's aiming higher.
Exactly. He's cementing LVMH's place at the pinnacle of taste, ensuring their brands are what the world's elite desire. It's trading sheer volume for like an unshakable cultural influence and long-term value among the most influential people.
Okay, makes sense. Third pillar, LVMH and the Olympics. The Paris 2024 Games. They weren't just sponsors, were they?
No, much more integrated. Abergel calls it a diplomatic coup, led by Antoine Arnault, who kind of acts as LVMH's chief cultural officer. Their maisons, their brands, became symbols within the Olympics, not just advertisers around it.
Like Chaumet designing the medals.
Exactly. And Berluti doing outfits for the torchbearers, things like that. Abergel argues this embedded LVMH into the collective global imagination on a massive scale.
They became part of the Olympic story itself.
Right. Weaving their brands into this huge moment of global unity and achievement. It's myth-making on a grand stage, using a global event to deepen their cultural roots. Very clever.
Very. Okay. And the fourth pillar Abergel mentions is Sephora. While other parts saw margins shrink, Sephora just kept growing double digits consistently.
Yeah, Sephora's a powerhouse.
Ah.
Abergel points to its strategy. Very curated product selection, emphasizing sensory experience in stores, being friendly to founder-led brands, focusing on human interaction.
He says it turns purchase into pilgrimage. That's quite a description for retail.
It is. He sees Sephora as a cultural nation in its own right.
Why? Just because it's successful?
It's more about how it's successful.
Yeah.
Abergel argues Sephora has built this whole ecosystem, physical and digital, that really roots consumer desire in something meaningful.
Right.
By curating so carefully, offering personalized advice, building a community, it transforms buying makeup or skincare from just a transaction into, like, a ritual, a journey. That builds loyalty way beyond just liking a product. It's another form of myth-making, but scaled up massively in retail.
So, pulling these 4 together, Dior, Moët Hennessy Private, the Olympics, Sephora, what's the big takeaway Abergel wants us to see?
His main point is crystal clear. These weren't isolated events. They were sovereignty moves, fighting financial softness into cultural depth. It really hammers home this idea that LVMH is playing a different game, focused on legacy, on cultural construction, not just the next earnings call.
Which brings us neatly to his conclusion, doesn't it? How does he wrap up this idea of the cultural nation?
He puts it very powerfully in the article, The Cultural Nation Strikes Back. He says, LVMH is a cultural nation, Versailles with a ticker symbol, where heritage commands desirability.
Versailles with a ticker symbol.
Yeah. So the market rally, in his view, wasn't about handbag sales figures. It was a response to this underlying cultural power, this heritage that's actively shaping its future. The market rallied to its command over desire, to this sovereign entity that, as he says, doesn't follow eras, it defines them.
And Bernard Arnault's own words seem to perfectly capture that mindset, right? That quote about still seeing the group as small.
Exactly. Je considère le groupe encore petit, et j'essaie de gérer LVMH comme une startup. I still consider the group small, and I try to manage LVMH like a startup. It's this blend. Build myth and heritage like an old institution, but stay agile and forward-looking like a startup. That's the cultural nation approach.
So Abergel suggests this recent soft period wasn't really a dip, but more like an investment.
Yeah, he calls it a down payment on the next era. It forces us and you listening to really think about value differently.
So the final thought he leaves us with is pretty provocative, isn't it?
It really is. He
Yeah.
basically asks, if this is how the cultural nation performs under pressure, rallying markets against the financial grain, commanding relevance, expanding its mythology even during a slowdown, then just imagine the premium, imagine the power when the global economy fully recovers, when the sky's clear.
It makes you wonder, what is the true currency of power and wealth going forward? Maybe, just maybe, cultural capital is becoming the ultimate asset. Something to definitely think about.